Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha TV, where our focus is on the crucial 2G case verdict. Former Telecom Minister A. Raja and M. Kanimori of the DMK and 15 others were acquitted of charges in what was described as India's biggest telecom scandal. The judge said that investigators could not prove that A. Raja, along with the officials from companies that won the licenses for the telecom services, had conspired to receive kickbacks from the sale of phone permits, causing a loss of 1.76 lakh crore rupees to the government. On the big picture today, we're discussing the significance of this verdict and its implications. Joining me on the show, we've got Mr. K. Badrinath, Editor Policy at the Financial Chronicle. We've got Mr. RVS Prasad, Independent Telecom Consultant, and also Aman Panwar from the Congress. He's the spokesperson of the party there. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me here in studio. We're hoping to be joined by somebody from the BJP as well, and we'll speak to them in a bit. Meanwhile, Mr. Badrinath, if I could start with you, this seems to be the scam that wasn't. The amount of numbers that were doled out and, of course, caused the fall of a government as well. What are you reading into this verdict? What do you make of it?
Well, the verdict as such, the judgment as such is very lengthy, as we were discussing earlier. My suspicion is that it's very significant for various reasons. It has its own political connotations.
Yes.
Then you have the legal aspect of the case. And third is there are several unanswered questions that needs to be looked into.
Absolutely. Mr. Prasad, you have been tracking the case from the very beginning. The Supreme Court's position of the case in 2012, how does this verdict match up to that, and how does it contradict it?
I certainly do think that the Supreme Court case of decision in February 2012, which cancelled the licenses, I have severe problems with that, because what it did is that several of the licensees were not those who jumped the queue. We have to really look at separating what was the policy in this whole controversy. There was a policy implication and there were the criminal allegations. The policy implication was that A. Raja continued to grant licenses on the first come first served basis in 2008 at a price which was determined in 2001 without indexation of for inflation or purchasing power parity, and that he continued with the first come first served policy and thereby caused a notional loss to the exchequer, for which the Controller and Auditor General gave its recommendations.
Yes. And
the allegations were that if he had that if A. Raja had auctioned the spectrum, then the government would have got that 1,76,000 crores. And the Supreme Court decision, where there were only a few of the operators were found to have jumped a queue, but it cancelled the licenses. It said the entire process has been vitiated and it cancelled the licenses of everyone.
So today's verdict, how is it different in that sense? And what does it mean further on for the case?
Well, I think today's verdict, where the judge, on looking at the criminal aspect, the criminal allegations was that A. Raja passed on inside information and to his cronies and enabled them to jump the queue, and that he changed the rules of the game after the game had started in order to favor his selected cronies.
Yes.
And that is what today's CBI judge O.P. Saini has said, that they have not been able to prove the criminality. Now, the Supreme Court judgment of February 2012 had a very serious implication, because you can trace the ills of the telecom sector today, the non-performing assets, 4,000 lakh crores of non-performing assets, to the Supreme Court decision, because all those operators had borrowed money from the public sector banks. About 100,000 telecom executives lost their jobs, led to severe job loss.
Yes. The
non-performing assets, and it was the public sector banks which took the hit.
Yes.
So I would trace that back to the whole controversy, where the Supreme Court did not look at a separation of policy and the criminal allegations. And today the criminal allegations stand as not proved.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of unanswered questions there. I believe we're being joined by Mr. Amit Malviya, National Head of the BJP IT Cell as well on the show. Mr. Malviya, thanks for joining us here. First of all, we've been getting all sorts of statements, of course, coming in from the BJP. How is the government, of course, viewing this verdict?
Look, what we have to understand is that the genesis of this trial is rooted in the spectrum allocation that happened in 2008. Now, there's a very significant judgment of the Supreme Court in 2012, which clearly points to the fact that there were policy lapses and the way the spectrum were auctioned was meant to favor a few. And if I can just quote to you what the Supreme Court said, it's fairly indicting of the minister at that point in time. It says that the exercise undertaken under the leadership of Minister A. Raja of C&IT, which is Communication and IT, was wholly arbitrary, capricious and contrary to public interest, apart from being violative of doctrine of equality. And it very clearly says that the evidences that it has got in front of it were meant to cause loss to the exchequer. Now, following these revelations and the facts that were put in front of the Supreme Court, they cancelled all the 122 licenses that were given at that point in time, because many of them were given on the first come first pay basis. There were irregularities in terms of how the auction was done, as in the policy or the bidding date was preponed 10 days and there was only a 1 hour window, and most people who submitted their bid already had a demand draft of the previous day, which obviously made it very obvious that somebody had sounded them off of the policy change and the fact they must be ready with the money. So there are all these things that are on record with the Supreme Court, which led
the Supreme Court to cancel to that question. Mr. Mallya, I'll just interrupt you there. That is why I went to that question of, how different this verdict is to the Supreme Court verdict. And Mr. Panwar, if you could join me at this point, but I'll just give a brief, read into what actually the para 1815 of this today's verdict actually says. It says the lack of clarity in the policies as well as guidelines also added to the confusion. So there was a lot of confusion. Apparently the people in the department itself were not clear about the policies, and that in itself raises a lot of questions in itself on what was the policy at that particular time, and did he actually follow the rules or not as well. It gives it raises those questions as well.
Policy, to my mind, has been very clear. There have not been any, lapse in terms of policy related issues. First come, first serve was the policy that was set up even before Congress or the UPA came into power.
That's right.
The main charge against the concerned minister or the structure, the power structure at that point of time was that this policy has been given a go by, and there was some kind of sweetheart deals that have happened, and thereby money has exchanged hands, and henceforth this is violative, and in interpretation it is like, kindly power peddling and corruption. This was the biggest issue, and I guess Judge O.P. Saini, one of the finest judicial officers we have, has taken on board all these issues, and perhaps he has delivered his judgment. Having said that, there are two things there. Well, this may not be the final word as such when you see it.
That's why the CBI and ED are saying they are going to appeal to the High Court.
And as the indications are today, it's likely to be challenged in a higher court by the government of the day. One. Second is, if you see, as he was saying, 2012, the Supreme Court had taken a serious cognizance of all the material evidence before the Honorable Court and has clearly stated that all these 122 licenses have to be cancelled because of malefactor. So that is the issue, that if there is no malefactor, then the highest court of the land would not have cancelled all the 122 licenses of 2G allocation. And henceforth, my guess is that this judgment would come up for a serious review by a higher court, and with possibility is that it could be overturned if there is some other kind of evidence that is there before the court. Number one.
All right. These are, of course,
and we have precedents on that.
These are, of course, speculation at this point in time.
Political aspect of it. J. Jayalalitha's case alone, in the disproportionate case, they said there is no evidence. There is nothing called a scam there. And after that, there's clearly the case was proved beyond doubt, and henceforth, I guess that we do not know where the twists and turns in the case would
Absolutely. We'll have to wait and see eventually what follows. But this has, of course, had an effect on, the 2G case has had an effect on governance. With the verdict now, what does it mean for polity, Aman?
See, the 2G case was used as a political pedestal by the Prime Minister and by the BJP during the UPA rule. I think if we go by the statistics, about 477 hours of Parliament's time was disrupted when the Parliament was not allowed to be functioned by the opposition. And if you see the then opposition, and if you see the Prime Minister's rallies during the run-up to the 2014 elections, it was all based on false propaganda. He did not talk about issues. He used to talk about 2G everywhere. And it was their government which was in power for last 3.5 years. Now the truth is out in the open. The CBI court, and it was a court-monitored investigation and a court-monitored trial that was going on. Even the public prosecutor was appointed by the apex court, by the Supreme Court. Every month, the CBI court used to send the status report to the apex court in a sealed cover and see what the CBI court says. The CBI court says, and I quote and unquote from the para number 1814 of the judgment, however, a huge scam was seen by everyone where there was none. These factors compelled people to conjecture about a big scam. Thus, people created a scam by artfully arranging a few selected facts and exaggerating things beyond recognition to astronomical levels. I mean, I think this, the verdict that has come out today, it kind of, stumps the BJP and their political propaganda, as we also saw in Gujarat, that the Prime Minister did not talk about issues, but went on to link the former Prime Minister with Pakistan, or link the former Chief of Army Staff with Pakistan.
Let's
the
take
same
that
political propaganda was going on in 2014.
All right, let's take it to Mr. Malviya then. Mr. Malviya, Subramanian Swamy also saying that Prime Minister Modi must fight corruption on a war footing, because in 2019, the public will hold us accountable for what we have done, and perhaps this could come up as well. What is going to be the strategy now?
Well, like I was saying earlier, this particular proceeding was monitored by the court at the behest of Supreme Court and the CVC. Now, what seems to have happened, and this is also something that's part of the judgment, and if I can quote point number 1812, it says, in the beginning, the prosecution started with the case with great enthusiasm and ardor. However, by the end, the quality of prosecution totally deteriorated and it became directionless. And also in the final phase of the trial, no senior officer or prosecutor was willing to sign applications or replies. Now, why I'm reading this out is because the special public prosecutor was appointed by the court. He was reporting to the court. He was taking the evidences that the investigating agency, the CBI, was putting up to the court and presenting it in a manner. Now, it seems that the judge did not find that they were represented to the court in a manner where it seemed to indict the accused. And therefore, we've heard the CBI and the ED now being clarified that they are going to appeal in the higher court. So we must wait for this to go through the motions until we get justice done. But let's just be very clear about one thing. The trial court or the CBI court's judgment today in no way cuts the Supreme Court judgment that came in 2012, which established that there was indeed a scam, there were indeed irregularities, and the Supreme Court believed that there was a criminality which has to be investigated. Now, what we are seeing is merely a procedural thing. It has gone through the lower court, it will go to the High Court and the Supreme Court, and I'm sure the judgment or justice will be delivered.
You would like to make a point very quickly?
My friend Amit Malviya does not understand the judgment of the Supreme Court in 2012. The Supreme Court in 2012 held as a prima facie view that this could be the reason, therefore we need to send the matter to trial. And if there was corruption and if there was any misdoing with respect to exchange of hands with respect to money or anything else, that should have come out in this judgment of the CBI court. And today you are saying that it was putting it on the public prosecutor. What was CBI doing? What was CBI doing? You were in power since last 3.5 years. If there was actually a scam, and why the Prime Minister was talking about it in every rally. not able to bring out the scam. That means you
let
were
us take this
you were
question to
doing a
Mr.
politics of
Prasad.
lies.
I'm very sorry.
Very clearly in 2012,
I'm sorry to interrupt both of you, but Mr. Prasad, if I could take this to you, then the very fact that yes, to a certain extent, you could say that the Supreme Court, of course, said that there was some sort of discrepancy, and that is why, of course, let's get the special CBI court to look into this case. The special CBI court looks into this case and says, okay, fine, they're not guilty. But the reasons are also interesting, because the reasons are that there was shoddy investigation. The reasons are that the policies were not clear. So it's not like the reasons were clear-cut as well. And that is why the questions are being raised on whether this verdict itself is crucial, whether it's going to be taken forward. And how do you see this moving ahead now?
Well, the Supreme Court verdict of February 2012, in my view, it confused between policies, procedures, and the loss to the exchequer and a wrongful gain or loss to private parties. Now, in my opinion, there was no loss to the exchequer. Kapil Sibal said this and he got, vilified for it. But I stand by that because it was a first come, first served basis and everyone paid the same license fee. So whether I get the license fee from Amit or I get the license fee from the Congress, it amounts to the same. So there was no loss to the exchequer in terms of if you follow the first come, first served policy with a fixed license fee. Now the Supreme Court went to the extent of saying that TRAI abdicated its responsibilities. But if you see the TRAI in August 2007 had very clearly said, recommended that for 2G, they continue with the same first come, first served policy for applications, and only all fresh allocations in new bands such as 3G and 4G should be by auction. But they said, look, the problem really arose because the Vajpayee government was trying to break a cartel. So to break a cartel in 2001, they said that they will allot telecom licenses to anyone who applies, who meets certain criteria, at a fee of 1651 crores.
Okay.
And the problem that arose is that subsequent governments from 2001 to 2008 continued at that fee of 1651 crores without indexing for inflation or purchasing power parity or other demands of spectrum. Therefore, what Manmohan Singh and others, the finance secretary, all wrote to the telecom minister saying that please consider indexation or a transparent method of arriving at a market determined price.
Okay.
Raja wrote back quoting the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India saying that, and the TRA had said it will be arbitrary, capricious to have 2G allotment because some have already got it by the allocation and they've started their operations, and therefore even if the rationale of TRA was okay, we didn't index from 2001 to 2008 in terms of price parity. We got it wrong. To correct this will cause even more problems. So let's continue with the existing policy, flawed as it may be, minor flaws, but all new bands, that's 3G, 4G, etc., should be by auction.
All right.
Yeah.
I need to bring this question, Mr. Badrinath, before I run out of time. This case in itself, it brought a lot of, not just across the country, the questions, of course, that were raised, and politically what it meant, of course, but even across the world, to a lot of media persons across the world, agencies, they took this case up because India, as far as corruption index is concerned, is way in the second half of, the list as far as, where it stands in the corruption list. How does this, when you have a systemic error being put out in this manner, how does it yield for India's credibility, do you feel?
The point here is that you should not see the telecom scam in its, separately in a silo. You have seen the coal scam as well. After the rebidding, what is the kind of revenue the government has got? I'm not getting into the political aspect by any chance.
Yes.
If you have seen the rebidding of the coal blocks, what is the kind of revenues that the government has got? Even the spectrum, after the licenses cancellation, then what is the kind of prices that it has fetched? These are the two key issues that would indicate that, to my mind, in my view, the CAG report is in a way has been bailed out with these two specific issues where the revenues of the government were bolstered after the rebidding of the spectrum licenses or the spectrum blocks in the different frequencies. And second is that in the coal scam also, what happened is the kind of revenues you got after the coal blocks were cancelled and in a separate case. So what I'm trying to say is that you should not see it as a singular case. There are a lot of such cases, irrespective of the government that was there in power. So we need to see how to put our systems in place and see that there is a kind of balance between the policy related issues and personal issues and political issues, and these three things need to be segregated and looked at the issue. In terms of the world kind of ranking, yes, corruption has been a big issue that has been pointed out in terms of World Corruption Index. When you see India, it's much, much higher. And today, in the last 2-3 years, at least the last World Bank report says that it has fallen by a few notches.
Yes.
So here, one, it's the perception part. Two, actually, how do we clean up this system?
Yes.
Three, issue is that how do the different organs like the judiciary, the investigating agencies, then the government's auditor, I mean, how are they weighing against each issue? There might be overlapping of powers. There might be competing interests as such. So my guess is unless this cleanup happens, it's going to be impacting our growth story in a big way.
Okay, Aman.
Tracy, I kind of agree with Mr. Badri that these kind of scandalous, baseless allegations that were being made by the then opposition did brought India's image down on the world platform. And I think it is not just that; it is also that the investment that we were getting and the growth story that we were building during the UPA was somewhere stalled by these kind of allegations, because it is not just the party against which you are making the allegations. You are bringing down India as a country. And I think they should have been more responsible, because now today, as the situation stands after the court verdict, all these allegations and the continuous stalling of parliament, the wild allegations that were being made in political rallies, they all fall flat. And now the government and the then opposition must come to the forum and apologize to the country.
All right. Would you like to react to that, Mr. Malviya, very quickly?
Well, it's very simple that the Congress party did indeed indulge in the scam, which cost the exchequer 1,76,000 crore.
You don't believe the court?
A very simple indication of that is that the Supreme Court did cancel the licenses. And let me finish and don't interrupt me when I'm speaking. The licenses were cancelled. The courts have very clearly said that there were malified intention and there was a bid to favor a few. There are irregularities that are on record, and therefore there's no running away from the fact. This trial court, CBI, was only investigating the criminality of it, and like I've said, the public prosecutor who was appointed by the government, the judge does not seem to think that he's done a decent job, and I'm sure when the matter is represented at the higher court, some of these things will get clarified. But I want to make a larger point, which is that after the UPA was done with throwing away precious natural resources to friends and families of their party, and the Supreme Court came and said that you must auction all natural resources. Look at what happened. We got about 1,09,874 crore in the auction that happened in March 2015. This was 67% above the reserve price that was kept. The second auction that happened in October 2016 got the government 65,789 crores. And even the 2G spectrum, which happened under the NDA government, got a 10% higher premium. So the fact is that they were throwing away a very precious resource at 2001 prices without thinking what it would mean for the country and what it would mean for the valuations of such a natural resource. And worse, they were giving out to people who had no expertise in this business. They would leak the policy, would prepone the policy date from to 1st October, only their friends would get to know.
We know where that went. Yes, we know where that went, and yes, thank you for highlighting that, of course, Mr. Malviya. But I'm sorry, we run out of time here. We're, of course, talking about the 2G case, and as we are talking about that, Could this be short-lived? The relief for the accused, we'll have to wait and see, because the ED and the CBI court, of course, the CBI, of course, they're going to be going ahead and filing in a higher court. We'll have to wait and see what eventually happens there. But thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining here. Thank you so much, Amit, for joining us as well. That's all the time I have on The Big Picture. Thank you.